Steph. We have Laura Kroesen. Sorry, Laura, if I got that wrong.
Laura Kroesen, yeah.
She's a graduate student in Dr. Dave Hicks' lab at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, and she's going to be discussing behavioral states as a proxy for habitat hotspots by mountain goats. So take it away, Laura.
Great, okay. All right, I think I'm good to go here. You can hear me and see me, Jenna?
Yep, sure can.
Great, okay, so yeah, my name's Laura Kroesen, and I'm just finishing my master's thesis at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, and my research is in collaboration with Parks Canada, and I'm studying mountain goats in the Canadian Rocky Mountains. And just for a quick aside for a second, I listened to a few talks over the past few days on mineralics. And just a quick plug, I have a paper coming out in the next day or two in wildlife biology on mountain goats and their movements towards mineralics. So if anyone wants to talk to me about mineralics as well, please shoot me an email or talk to me. I have my email at the end of the presentation, and I'm just be really happy to chat about movements to mineralics and everything like that. But I am going to pivot today, and I'm going to be talking about my other research project, that's part of my thesis, which is identifying mountain goat habitat hotspots in the high alpine using behavior. So we know mountain goats are difficult to study, and they live in high alpine habitats and often in places that are difficult to reach for humans. And in my study area, they're easily spooked if researchers are spotted entering their domain. And so conservation managers stress the importance of understanding mountain goat behavior and how they use their habitat. But due to their remote and complex environment that mountain goats reside, it's hard to physically observe their behavior. And specifically, one of Parks Canada's questions was to know what areas within a mountain goat's home range are the most important and what are they doing when they are there. So my research question is, where are habitat hotspots? And not only where they're spending most of their time, like foraging and bedding, but also where they spend proportionately less time, like movement corridors. And so all these places are important for land managers to know about, but how they can't detect using some traditional modeling techniques. So I wanted to find places where they spend lots of time, what they're doing when they're there, and how they connect these places together. So I used hidden Markov models, which is a time series of fine spatial and temporal data. Today's talk, I'm going to walk you through how we used a time series of GPS locations from collared mountain goats, and then using hidden Markov models to predict behavioral states of mountain goats. And then I'll discuss some environmental covariates I added to the model to see if we can predict different behavioral states over time of day and distance to escape terrain. And then how I ground validated those behavioral states by visiting these places and finding physical evidence of their behaviors. First, my study area is in Yoho and Banff National Parks in the Canadian Rocky Mountains. And I have two separate study groups of mountain goats, one in what I call a Sherbrooke area and one in the Slate Mountain ranges. And so I have 10 GPS collared mountain goats in each location. And I'm lucky enough to have hourly location points, get hourly location points from those GPS collars. So these study groups are 15 kilometers apart, but they're separated by the Continental Divide and also by highways. So the yellow lines are major roads, highways, and the star, just to locate you, is Lake Louise. The blue points are GPS collared locations of the Sherbrooke herd, or some of the Sherbrooke herd, and the pink points are 10 Slate range goats, and these locations are just for June and July, which are the dates that I used in my analysis. So first, I'll just walk you through what a hidden Markov does and what it uses. So it uses characteristic movement patterns for GPS collared animals So for example, this is our GPS colored goat, and we have known hourly location points. For example, this goat, we have locations for 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, and then from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock. And from these locations, we can calculate some measurements that are produced from the time in between these GPS location points. We can get step length, which is either distance or speed between the two time series. And then adding one more movement, you can get turning angle. And so from these measurements, we can infer behavioral states that are common in ungulates. For example, if our goat had moderate steps and moderate turning angles, I would infer that this goat would be foraging, because you would expect a goat to be moving slowly, but moving around in similar places eating. If the goat has large steps and large direct turning angles, I would infer that the goat was traveling, because a goat would be moving directly from one area to another area. If the goat had small, very small steps and small turning angles, I would infer it was bedding, because it wouldn't be moving. So now I can use these parameters that I set, foraging, traveling, and bedding, in the model to infer specific behaviors in all of the movements of the goats that I had collared. So I ran a hidden Markov model, and this is an example of kind of the output I get of one female mountain goat over 2 weeks in late June. And so I can produce a map, and each point has a predicted behavioral state. Orange is foraging, traveling is blue, and bedding is green. And we see that the foraging and bedding areas are clustered, and the traveling state is wide ranging, and that's as I inputted into my model. And so we did find that mountain goats spend 55% of their time foraging, 20% of their time traveling, and 25% bedding. And so we did know from our fieldwork areas that these locations are very similar to, like, we knew that the trails were very similar to where they were traveling, and also some high quality foraging areas that we know they spend time. And so we knew that this was somewhat accurate in terms of like from our boots on the ground. So using some environmental covariates, or inputting some environmental covariates, we used inferred behavioral states. And so I looked at two different, I looked at two different covariates, how behaviors change over the time of day, and also from distance to escape terrain. So first, looking at the time of day, y-axis is the probability of goats being in a certain behavioral state. And the x-axis for this graph it starts at 0, which is midnight, and goes over a 24-hour period. And the left graph is Sherbrooke, the Sherbrooke group, and the right graph is the Slate group. So we did find that time of day does influence the probability of goats being in a specific behavioral state, as expected. And so we found that foraging activity occurs in the daylight hours. Traveling is more likely to occur in the crepuscular periods. And bedding happens at night and in the mid-afternoon. And we found a similar pattern for both the Sherbrooke and the Slate range. Next, I measured the locations and their distances from escape terrain. And the y-axis stays the same with the probabilities, but the y-axis is the distance from escape terrain in meters. So I found it was more likely to find both groups to forage away from escape terrain, while both groups bedded near escape terrain. But we found that mountain goats in the Sherbrooke range traveled away from escape terrain, while the Slate range traveled within escape terrain. I think that's really interesting, but I think it's because each range has different topography. And Sherbrooke, as you can see on the left, has more moderate slopes, and so we found a lot of trails that travel along the ridges, whereas the Slate range has a more castle-like appearance, and they seem to take advantage of the steep and cliffy terrain and make their trails up there. as noted as on our fieldwork, because we couldn't validate many trail sites in the slate range. So the last thing I did was ground validate the behavioral model. And so we did this first before I ran a hidden Markov model analysis. And we were originally looking for high alpine mineral licks, but we didn't find any. So the field site selection that we did and the ground validation wasn't targeted to ground validate hidden Markov models. So I'm still working on it. And the results are still the precision results are still very preliminary, and we're really expecting the numbers to change. But so for our ground validation, we did go out and we visited specific GPS collar locations, and we visited almost 100 field sites. And so it was about half in each study area. And it was only those that we could safely reach by foot. And so we classified these areas using physical evidence of behaviors. So for foraging, we surveyed for signs of herbivory. For traveling, we looked for trails, and surprisingly, we found massive trails connecting habitats, which I thought was a very cool part of my, my findings. And then for bedding, we looked for evidence of oval shapes dug out in the grass or in rocky slopes. So we found during our field visits that a lot of points that we visited had evidence of all three behaviors, and it really complicated our validation. So keep that in mind when I share the results. To be very conservative, we did a rules-based approach because we found so many areas that had more than one activity. So to be conservative with our precision in ground validation, we used this rules-based approach. We decided that signs of bedding trumped all other evidence. So if there were trails and bedding sites, we called it a bedding site. And then for high foraging evidence, if there was no bedding, then we called it a foraging area. And then lastly, if there were no other significant evidence, we called that a traveling site. So using this a conservative approach so far, we found our precision in our ground validation was 74% for foraging, only 50% for traveling, and 58% for bedding, an overall precision of 64%. Again, we're expecting these numbers to change, and I'm really suspecting that this low precision has to do with our field selection and not our hidden Markov model accuracy. And of course, we used a rules-based approach here, so goats don't just do one behavior in one place. So I'm currently working on a way to fine-tune the model to introduce the probabilities of behavioral states. But yeah, so just throwing it out there, if anyone is interested in talking about hidden Markov models and probabilities and anything like that, or any has any ideas, please shoot me an email, which is at the end, and we can chat about it. So what I want to highlight with this talk is that we can use GPS collar data to infer the behavior of mountain goats in specific areas, even in places we can't reach. For example, this picture, we identified these cliffs below as a highly used foraging and bedding site, but we couldn't get our feet on the ground there because it was too steep and too dangerous for us to access. So this means that we can interpret how and why goats are using the areas without observing them, which is very complicated in the mountain goat case. And so we can identify places within their habitat that are being used in different ways, even on complex terrain. And of course, all parts of mountain goat home ranges are not equal. And as land managers, we can use this approach to detect habitat hotspots and even places that they spend little time, like movement corridors, and concentrate our conservation efforts. So some future directions, I really want to refine the model to increase the precision and accuracy of our ground validation, and hopefully we can do some drone work as well. I want to increase focus on trails because I think it's a great tool to detect these movement corridors. And also, I think that it could be very strong, this hidden Markov model approach could be really strong in exploring other time periods to detect kidding areas and mineral licks, hopefully, and wintering habitats. So thank you very much for listening to my talk. My email is here if we can't get to any questions with the Q&A. And I just want to, thank Parks Canada. The field work would not have been possible without the financial and in-kind support of the Lake Louise, Yoho, and Kootenay field units. And my field technician, Simon Campbell. And of course, my supervisors, David Hick and Seth Cherry. So thanks so much.
Thanks for that, Laura. That was really great. And we do have a couple minutes for some questions. So I've got a few for you here right now, and people can continue to send them in. So the first one here is from Catherine, and she says, "Hi, Laura, I enjoyed your talk. I might have missed it, but did you have both males and females collared, or just females?"
Yes, we had males and females collared. We had almost half and half ratio. I think in the Sherbrooke range, we had 5 and 5. And in the Slate range, we had 6 males and 4 females. And we've had a few, I think a few die, and we've recollared them now. And I think it's about 50-50 still, so.
Perfect, thank you. She's also wondering, did you do some ground truthing, meaning test direct observations with collar data?
Oh, like were we looking at them? Okay, yeah, no, we didn't. Which is, there's a lot of papers out there trying, well, I think there's just 1 or 2 right now that do look at observing animals while they are while they're collared, and to see if that works with their with the hidden Markov model behaviors. And there was like the paper that I read, it was really hard to tell where because the hidden Markov model is just looking at the average of their movements, and then if you're on the ground looking at detailed behavior, you have to take notes of the detailed behavior every minute within that hour, and then average that. But I think that would be a really cool fieldwork thing to do, because it'd be really difficult, but really interesting for mountain goats to just really target in on that behavior.
Thanks for that. So Grant Chapman is wondering, could you elaborate on your intended use of UAVs in this project?
Sure. Well, it's just something we've been throwing around because there's places that I couldn't get to. I had targeted 120 or 150 places to visit, and a lot of those places were too steep or too dangerous for myself or my field technician to go. So we were thinking how it'd be great if we could put a drone up there and see, and we wouldn't be able to get as much detail as if we were on the ground, but we could look at vegetation, or if there was just a really distinct trail up there, to see what the goats are doing, because there's places that are just insane. Obviously, you guys know, they're mountain ungulates that you just can't get to, and so drones might be a really a cool way to look at their habitat.
Thank you. And so a follow-up question to the caller question: if males and females were collared, were there sex differences in behavior?
I actually didn't look at the sex differences in their behavior for this part, but that's the second time I've been asked this question, so I think I'll go back and look for sexual differences, because I'm sure I tried to target, in June and July, they have kids, the females will have kids and the males don't. And my other paper actually was looking at sexual differences in mineral use and everything, so might be a really good way to tie in both of those chapters of my thesis. So maybe I'll do that. I'll actually take that into consideration, Catherine. Thank you.
Thanks. And I think we've got time for one more. So this one's a little bit of a long one. Hi, Laura. Very interesting work. The BC government is trying to map mountain goat winter range. Initial RSF modeling has broadly overestimated winter range. They're now looking at an occupancy modeling approach. How do you see your work contributing to delineation of a high value winter range, essentially extrapolating it across larger regional scales?
Well, I guess, with this, you can get really fine, detailed behavioral movements. So you can really you can tell like where their bedding sites are. So it's like you could really batch all of the mountain goats as long as it has consistent time series and time and spatial data. It's like as long as every single thing has like 1 hour or 2 hour frequencies for data collection, you could actually just run it through the code and get the behaviors for everywhere. I'm still working on like doing a kernel density function, or like kind of coming up with ways to actually like map on the landscape, like how mountain goats are using the landscape. Like I can tell like individually where the trails are and stuff. But I haven't been able to like put a kernel density function or something over top and be like, this is where they're most likely to travel, or this is where they're most likely to bed. I'm still kind of working on ways to visually interpret that.
Perfect. Thanks so much. That's all the time we have. Really appreciate the presentation and all of the questions. I can see Kevin signaling here.
Jenna, before we break for lunch, I think Laura made mention of her email a couple different times. I've had people that I thought were part of the ENews Network that have contacted me and said, oh crap, we didn't know, this was going on, or we weren't aware. And so I want to just screen share for a moment if I can. I'm not sure I can. I want to pull up our website for the council, and yeah, here we go. And so I just want to direct people, there's still 125 on right now. In the event that you haven't already done this, on our homepage, and you can see it's a simple NWSGC.org, on the left-hand margin, this subscribe function, and it's not live, so I'm not going to click on it, but I just use this as an example. Well, wait, yeah, I'm sorry, I can. So if you're not currently part of the ENews Network and would like to be, for announcements and new publications and research and management questions and job vacancy announcements, etc., I'd encourage you to sign up here. And we don't share this list with anybody. And so if Jane Doe signs up here, what you'll get is a confirming email that says, okay, really, do you want to sign up for this? And it will say yes. And so this is the way for people to get on there. I'm not sure if some people have overlooked that or never looked, but I wanted to point this subscribe page out, and that's your pathway to get onto the ENews Network, if that makes sense. So just wanted to take advantage of Laura's reminder about emails, and I've had a couple folks contact me that I thought were on it, and so appreciate that. But excellent morning.
Perfect. Thanks for that. So yeah, sign up if you haven't. Otherwise, we are now done a little bit early, so we're going to head into our lunch break. We will be resuming at 1:10 to continue the behavior and ecology section with the last couple presenters of the day. So ask that everybody just return for that. And just a quick note for the presenters, you'll be bumped up. And if you want a chance to test out, we can do that over the end of the lunch break. So we'll see everybody when we return at 1:10.
And Jenna, thank you for stepping in to pinch hit for Matt.
Oh, not a problem.
Okay.
Have a good lunch, everyone.